This conference will now be recorded.
Anyway, appreciate again everyone, and thanks again for joining on a Sunday morning. So before we get started, let me introduce myself. So my name is Adam, and if this is the first time we are interacting, so basically I'm a senior architect who's currently working, and I have close to 18 plus years of experience. And what I've been doing is working with different customers, different product based companies in which we do consulting and help the organizations in setting up a process in which they can improve, or which helps the organizations in doing the releases faster or cost efficiency, or they want to migrate from their traditional way of working into a modern way of working, right? So, with that, again, I'm more of a trainer and a mentor out of my passion. So, that's where we keep training people from different categories, whether you are a fresher or someone with a career gap, or even if you are someone who's doing in higher studies or with some experience and you want to try to switch into a better profile. It's always that we ensure that we mentor on what exactly your profile should look like and how you should be approaching yourself into the market so that you will always get a good salary or a better profile. Okay. So, with that, before we get started again, for all those subscribers, I humbly give a thank, and at the same time, for all the new joiners or beginners, right? Please do make sure you are subscribed to the channel, wherein we have plenty of contents and videos. So in case if you are a newbie or an experienced, we have a mix of almost close to 120 videos of all the ranges. Okay, so here there are different playlists. So if you are a beginner, I would recommend you guys to go with start something with Linux and scripting, and then you can get into the projects. And we also have some of the videos on the cloud basics, right? Git basics. So that way, for beginners, it's a wonderful place to get started. But at the same time, if you're an experienced person, the next level, there are some advanced topics that we have which will help you to get into, tools like the CI/CD or Kubernetes or security side, so that from a project perspective, if you are trying to implement something, it'll always be there. So I would again humbly request everyone to ensure you have subscribed to the channel so that any new webinars that we go through, you will be able to receive it. All right. So, what's next? So, the agenda that what I wanted to talk about today is more on what's exactly the market looking at, because some people say DevOps, some people say SRE, some people say DevSecOps, or someone say Cloud Ops or platform engineering. So many things out there, right? So let us first understand where the market is, especially as of 2025. What is that organizations are expecting, so that when you join an organization as a fresher or an experienced person, what is that skill set that you should carry? Okay, and in that, specifically about this automation domain with different names, like what we call it as the DevOps or SRE, let's kind of understand what are the tools and the knowledge that organizations are looking for. All right, so that's the primary agenda of what and all that we will be going through. And stay back, as I said, if there's any questions, and I'll take it up at the end. So, on a lighter note, well, I believe in most of our houses we have maid, or even earlier, let's say a couple of years back, we used to have maid, right? Now, when you look at the scenario, we used to have maid for different things, right? We need someone to help us in cleaning the house. We need someone to cook, and we need someone to even wash the clothes or even buying groceries. So there are like different things, and one person cannot do. So that's where for larger the house, you need more maids or more people to help you. Now, what was happening? Obviously, the cost is going to be high, correct? Because you have to pay for everyone. Then what is happening in the market right now or with us? So do you think you are going to hire so many maids? No, right? So what do we do? So usually we hire one maid, and that maid should be helping us in everything like cooking or washing or cleaning, or even let's say you wanted to shop and buy some groceries or vegetables, she should be able to get. So how is that a maid now on 2025 can do the work of four people or five people who were doing couple of years back? Okay, logically it is not possible, because end of the day, what is that we expect? The maid should do all the work within the same 1 hour or 2 hour and then finish. So how is it really possible? Now this is where actually things come into usage of machines, correct? Which is nothing but automation. So everything is being automated. So you don't have to really wash the clothes in hands and even dry it separately. Well, you have some automation machine called as washing machine, in which you put everything, you set a timer, and it will do all the work, whether it is washing or even drying. So at the same time, what does the maid can do? She can focus on some other work. So at the same time, she is going to be able to do two work, right? Same way, cooking also. So most of the things are machine wise and automated. So a person doesn't have to sit and do all the work. So this is how a single maid can take care of your washing, your cooking, your cleaning, right? And even you wanted to buy something from the shop, well, book it online. Well, you have so many things like Blinkit or whatever the different stuffs, and they just get you in 10 to 15 minutes. So this is how a single person is able to do different tasks through the help of automation, and for that there are different machines, correct? Exactly the same scenario is what is happening in IT organizations. So now everyone has this big question. So either I'm a 2+ experience or 5+ or 10+ or 12+, whatever. You might be from different categories, right? So you might be a developer, or you might be a support engineer, or a QA engineer, or a DBA guy, or some kind of person who's working in middleware. Now, regardless of all these, now what is the company looking at? Now, first thing is they are trying to eliminate all these different positions. I mean, I won't say exactly developer and QA, now keep it aside, but most of the other operational positions that we had, correct, has been completely removed. And what is that company is expecting is a person should be doing multiple tasks, or in other way, the new positions that they are creating, let's not worry about the name what they are giving. Okay, so the positions needs to be a multiple hat with a different roles, or they just simply call it as a multi-hat role. So what do you mean by a multi-hat role? Just like a maid, where a single person you want to take care of cooking, cleaning, and washing, the same way, instead of having a separate person to take care of administration of system and networking, someone to take care of production support, someone to take care of operations. So what they are trying to do is they are looking at every engineer to have multiple roles to be performed. Okay, now eventually how is that you can do? Because you are already a QA engineer, or you are already an ops engineer. The same way, like what I was saying in the terms of a maid, is automation. So organization wants us to automate everything as much as possible, whatever work we are doing. So that way what will happen? You do not need one person dedicatedly sitting in front of the system and looking at what it is doing or managing it manually. So instead, at the same time, we can run 2 to 3 tasks. All right. So that's exactly in general what an organization is looking at. But however, in this, what will happen? There are certain skills that they look at, like how you are hiring a maid. Well, certain skills that you want to know is, yeah, definitely she should know cooking, she should know how to clean and obviously wash, and certain other things that you want, right? Now exactly in that way, if you go to market, when companies are removing all this position, there are some common skills that they want everyone to take care of. Okay, now from that angle, if you look at what and all that a company wants us to do, Now, apart from the core development or the core programming or the core testing, most of the other ops work can be automated. So, what they are looking at is first, no matter what kind of work that you're going to do in an organization, you need to have a infrastructure. Correct? So what is infrastructure? So you need machines or servers, you need database, you need to create some storage, you need to create some kind of network. So what they need is someone who has the skill to automate the infrastructure. Okay. Now, again, when we say infrastructure, most of it should be on cloud. However, some companies still use on-prem or VM, but regardless of that, any infra that you're going to create, the first skill that an organization is expecting almost from everyone is you should be familiar with how to automate and create infrastructure whenever you need. Next. Okay, so you create the infrastructure, or let's say you create a machine or create a database. But what after that? Now, the next common or the expected skill which an organization is expecting from everyone in 2025 is server configuration. What is server configuration? So let's say you know how to create 10 machines at the same time, but within that 10 machines, we are not going to use all the machines in the same way. For example, I can also buy a Lenovo or a Mac laptop. You can also buy a Lenovo or a Mac laptop. But do you think both of them will be same? No. I might use it for some particular task for which I might need Java or Docker. But let's say you're going to run some Go language application or a database or something like a Node.js, then you need different configuration. Now, that is when the next or the second skill which organization is looking at is once you create the machine, how are we going to automate the configuration? So what is configuration? Configuration means you want to install some software, upgrade some software, create some file, create some user, or start some application, right? So like that, whatever the machines that you have, you should be knowing how to automate those server differently so that I can use it for a development work or for a testing or for some kind of production work in which I can put different languages and I can run. Okay. So this is where it is necessary for all of us to make sure that we are familiar with how do we configure the machines that we have created. Okay. Request everyone to go on mute, please. Okay. So that's the second skill set that you have, which is server configuration. Then the next skill which organization is looking at will be building an application, because earlier we used to have a dedicated team called as release team or a build team whose only work is to take all the programs whatever you have and create an application like a jar file or a tar file or any other specific product that you want to create. But it has been mandatory that in 2025 you should also be knowing how to build the application, so that let's say you are a developer, you should also know how to build it. Well, you are a QA, you should also know how to build the application, because why do you need someone else to build the application and give you and you will do only testing? So that is where everyone has to start taking up multiple responsibility. Same way, if you are a production guy or a ops team, you should also be able to know how to do the build whenever we need and use that to deploy on production. Okay. So building different programming languages is also one of the skill which is being expected from everyone. But again, how to automate is what we need to know. Then comes the deployment. What do you mean by deployment? Now, whether a QA has to use the application or whether a customer has to use the application, what we need to know is how are we going to install the application that we have built, and how do we run that application on whatever the machines that you want. So that is technically what we call it as deployment. So that whether you have a Java application or a Node.js application or a Python or a Go language application, how do you install and run that application across all the machines that you want? So another and most important skill that organizations are looking at, especially all the product organizations are expecting, is the deployment skill, or the automation that you should be aware to help the deployments on different machines. Okay, then what? Well, when you're going to take care of so much of responsibilities, or if you have the ability to take care of these responsibilities, now monitoring is another skill which has been added, right? Because it's not like, okay, I will build a house and I will leave it. So you should also know that your house has any leakages, like power leakages, or there is any water leakage, right, or sewage. So you need to have a look at everything, and frequently any maintenance has to be done. The same way, when you are going to use many machines in which your applications will be running and used for testing or production, we also have to know the skill of how do we monitoring. So that you should know how to monitor a machine, and you should also know how to monitor a application that you are running. And that's where it could be a Java application or a Node.js or a Spring Boot, right? You should know what exactly to monitor. And at the same time, we should also know how do we monitor the logs, because when you are running the application in the traditional method, we used to take the output of the application, which is called as the log, and store it into a machine. But now, since we are coming up with modern deployments like Kubernetes, you will have multiple machines in which your applications are running. So we need to have a skill on how do we collect all the data or the logs from different applications and manage it. So that is where monitoring application, monitoring your infrastructure, and monitoring the logs is another primary skill which an organization is expecting in addition to all the other skills. And finally, one of the other key role that organization is expecting and the skill in which they want us to have is securing. So what is securing? Or this is what we call it as the DevSecOps. So you're using so much of infra, like so much of machines, database, network, and different applications that you're running. We need to be also aware on how do we make sure that all these things are running securely. So whatever you're automating, we should also focus on securing them. Okay, so this is another important skill set which organizations want us to have. And this is where, finally, where are you going to run all these? So whether you're creating the machine or you're running your application or you're trying to secure, right? The entire platform that we run is where not a traditional way of using your VMs or physical servers, but instead they want you to have the skill of cloud. So now when you go to a company, if you say you have been automating all these, then definitely it has to be a cloud native operation that you have done, or whatever the automation that you're going to help a company should be cloud native. What do you mean by cloud native? It is primarily focused on cloud. So you're not just going to do some build on a VM, but you are going to give the solution or the automation which is focused only on the cloud. So that way you're not going to just say that I know how to deploy or automate deployment, or I know how to do the security, but you are going to do all these things on a platform which is cloud. So typically you can say these are like 6 or 7 skills or responsibilities which an engineer is going to have. Now, exactly. Now, in terms of technical side, we have a name. Okay. So this is where if you put across when you go to an organization, okay, so first thing, why an organization needs this new domain called DevOps or SRE or CloudOps. Okay. Now, eventually, they need it for these four categories because we already have people working. But what is that they need is people to take up additional responsibilities, additional roles in which a company can make sure that they are continuously delivering the product. That means they develop the product and test it, and immediately they should be able to deliver. So that is why most of the softwares that you're using, you can see almost once in 2 weeks or once in 3 or 4 weeks you will be getting updates, correct? So how is it possible so fast? Because companies are adapting to a principle called continuous delivery, in which they need people to help in automating development continuously and test it continuously. In fact, for it, build continuously, deploy continuously, and we will deliver it continuously. Okay, the same way. Now, it is not sufficient for us only to know how to create infrastructure or automate the infrastructure in cloud, but you should also be able to scale. So that's where, whether there is a live sale that is happening on any e-commerce, you log in, or there is a match or a movie that has been playing, multiple users log in. So to manage that load, we should be able to scale our infra. That is, we should be able to create multiple machines, and we should be able to configure those multiple machines, and we should be able to deploy or run the applications on those machines, and finally we should be able to monitor those machines. So that's how all these four areas will be put together. Okay, and that's exactly monitoring means. Okay, I created some machine and I'm just monitoring will not be sufficient. Especially now we need a little advanced monitoring, wherein you need to know how your application is performing. Is it really working fine, or is there any changes has to be done? So those are the ways where we call it as observability is needed. So observability means you're getting deeper into some metrics which will help you to understand whether your application's performing is fine or application performance is better. So that is where you will have terminologies like latency, throughput, okay, how many connections that it is able to receive, what is the response. So that way we will make sure that whether you're a customer, you log into any application's website in the morning or in the evening or even in the midnight, application serves the same, right? I cannot say that, hey, I'll work only for morning 9 to evening 7, and beyond that my application support will not be there. Well, 24 bar 7 it has to be there, correct? So that's where now companies want someone to have some additional skills and help on this high availability. And finally, is the security part, where since everything is becoming more of web and we are using cloud as our platform, it is necessary for the organizations to secure each and everything that we are doing. So, because of this primary requirements for the organization, what they did is they started forming a new group of people, or a new designation, or I can simply say a new role, in which, in addition to whatever that you were doing so far, okay, you also have to take up additional responsibilities. So that is what we call it as a multi-role position. Okay, now the question will come, okay, so you are saying all my previous positions are going away and they are coming up with this new designation or a position or a role in which you will be having different responsibilities. Now this is when you're going to have certain skills which is called as primary and secondary. Now let me talk about first developers. Now if you are already a programmer, okay, or a developer, now, your work was so far only to write code, but as you move forward, writing code will be your primary skill. But still, as a secondary skill, they will expect, do you have knowledge on cloud? Do you have knowledge on how do you build? So do you have knowledge on how do you deploy? Or in some big product companies, they also expect, do you also know how to create your own infra? So that is how, for every individual like a programmer, you also need to have a secondary skill, which is what we were talking about, the automation. So development will be his primary skill, but secondary skills will be automation. The same thing happens to QA. However, in many companies, if you have looked at, they will have a QA team in which your primary skill will be QA, but what are your secondary skills? Because now, if you are going to automate your QA set test suite, what is the remaining time that you're going to do? So they are going to expect you should also be familiar with things or skills like build automation, deploy automation, monitoring the log, or in fact, it's not about infrastructure, but let's say a machine is given to you, you should know how to configure it so that you can do the testing. So that's how these become a secondary important skill for a QA engineer also. Okay. But apart from that, no matter which kind of operation position that you are, whether you could be a system admin, network admin, database admin, or any kind of administrator that you have for an application, or a support engineer, ops engineer, release engineer, well, now they have this common position in which they want you to have these as your primary skills. So that is how all the old positions has been removed, and they are forming all the new positions as DevOps or SRE. And in that, they will expect the primary skills that you should have is not one, but different things. So that's where they will expect you should know how to automate infra, you should know how to configure the machine, and you do all these things in the cloud, and you should know how to build and deploy them, and you should also know how to secure them. Okay. But still, the question or the confusion will come. Okay, so you're telling, apart from developer or QA, anyone who wants to completely switch to this, you need to have all these skills. But still, why the company call as DevOps? Why the company call it as SRE or DevSecOps? Right now, typically, these are the three things that you will be actually seeing in the market. Right, DevOps, SRE, DevSecOps, and you also have platform engineering. Now, the simple difference is you go to the organization or the team. Now, within the same organization, one person or one team cannot do all the tasks or the skills that I was telling. So that is where they will have different group of people, and your responsibility will be different. So let's say I want a group of people or an engineer who should be primarily focusing on continuous delivery, in which you will be very closely working to the product team, that is the developer and QA team and customer, and your primary focus is continuous delivery. Then the designations will be called as DevOps. So that is where, when your position is DevOps, or you are going to support the responsibility of DevOps, your major responsibility or the expectation or the skills that they will look at, primary skill, is you know how to build, and you know how to automate. Okay. And how to help the configuration. So these are the primary skills. However, that doesn't mean that as a DevOps engineer you will not do anything. On need basis, they will also expect you that you have a secondary skill set like building the infrastructure, monitoring, and securing. So that way, you still have to know all of them, but understand, on a day-to-day activity, more work will be given to continuous delivery, and on need basis, you will be taking care of certain other things on the infrastructure, monitoring, and security. So then those positions are what we call it as DevOps. Now, at the same time, you go to an organization where, or a team in which there is already a DevOps team, right? Now, let's say you go to a very large product company like Google, LinkedIn, or Uber, or any large company where the operations is huge, like the production is huge. In fact, your Netflix and everything. Now, apart from just building and deploying, now they have a huge infrastructure that they have to take care, which is where the scalability and high availability has to be maintained. So that is where, in SRE, the primary skill that they will expect you is you should be familiar in provisioning or creating the infrastructure specifically on the cloud. And at the same time, the second primary skill what they will expect you is to know how to do different monitoring that is possible, because you should be very much familiar with production and you will work very closely with the customers. Okay, and then you should also be familiar with deploying, especially tools like Docker and Kubernetes. So these three will be your primary skill. However, along with this, you should also have secondary skill, like if a machine is given, you also know how to configure, and if needed, you should also be helping the company in automating like builds, and also you can focus on security. So that way, in your day to day, majority of the work you will be doing is focusing towards the infrastructure creation, monitoring them, and deploying. However, you will still need to know that secondary skills so that if a requirement comes, you will be working. Correct? And then comes the DevSecOps. So, what is DevSecOps? Now, as I said, there's already a team called DevOps who's focusing primarily on building and deploying. Now, there is another team called SRE who's primarily focusing on creating the infrastructure, monitoring that infrastructure, and also automating the deployment. Now, finally comes the security. So, they started forming a team called DevSecOps, in which your primary responsibility is, okay, there are already so many tools available. How are you going to make sure that each one of them is secure? So that way, how do you make sure the infrastructure is secure, right? How do you make sure the build is secure? How do you make sure the deployment is secure? How do you make sure your monitoring is secure? Not only that, how do you make sure that when a customer accesses your applications, it is secure? So that's where in DevSecOps position, your primary skill will be knowing that tools and concepts which will help to monitor or secure all the different processes that we already have. But obviously, when you are aware of all those tools, what are you going to help? Like, for example, I said you need to know how to secure the deployment of Docker and Kubernetes. For that, there are some tools. But end of the day, unless and until you don't know what is deployment and how Kubernetes is work, you will not be able to implement. So that is where you will still need to have a secondary skill, like being aware of what is deployment, being aware of what is build, and being aware of what is monitoring. So that way, regardless of what positions that you see, almost for every one of us, it is necessary to be aware of those 7 skills. Okay, so that's exactly what we are telling. All right, so cloud is the platform knowledge wherein everything that you're going to create the infrastructure. And next, automating your infrastructure, that skill is called as infra as code, IAC. And automating your server configuration is the skill or the technology, what we call it as configuration management. That was the old name. The new name for that is configuration as code. And then automating your builds and deployment is what we call it as pipeline. So build pipeline, deployment pipeline, testing pipeline. And at the same time, automating your deployments is what we call it as containers. And that's where the popular Docker and Kubernetes resides. And then automating your monitoring and logs, so that skill is what we call it as SRE. And enabling security at all these tools and processes, what you call it as DevSecOps. Now, there's one more thing which is also needed is, okay, you're not going to randomly do all this work. So you go to a company, you will not suddenly get a requirement to create a machine or to configure a machine or to do a build or a deployment. Well, everything happens for a release. So what exactly is release? When you have to do the development, when the testing should happen, when we should give it to customer. So there is a process. That's exactly what we call it as release or agile. So eventually, now in 2025, if you are trying to switch for a different position, so you need to understand with your existing skill that you already have, you need to be aware of all the skills, so that depending on which company that you go and which team that you are joining, few might be primary and few might be secondary. So my suggestion would be here is not to pick and choose. You know what? Many people come and do that. So they will come and say, hey, I am a support engineer. So I learned only Kubernetes. but still when I go to the interview, I'm not getting cleared. Why? Like I said, which position you are applying. Are you applying as a DevOps engineer? Then learning only Docker and Kubernetes, which is just the automation on the deployments, because they still expect some of the primary skill from you, which is build, that is pipelines, and they also need to know how you create or the infrastructure using cloud. So that's where, depending on which position that you're applying, there are certain primary and there are certain secondary skills. And that's exactly when you open any job description, right, for a position that you apply or for an interview, you will see they will ask everything. Okay. But as you take up the interview, when you start discussing with them, once you understand the position is for the DevOps or SRE or for the DevSecOps, well, what problem they are solving? Are they solving this position to help continuous delivery or high availability, or you're going to help in scalability or the security part? So depending on that, there will be heavy focus on certain tools and then slowly it will come down. But regardless of any of these, this is where it's necessary for you to be aware of all these, so that you can continue to be a developer or a QA engineer and take up these additional skills, and only then you will be able to get into a better position. Or you can completely change your designation from being a QA engineer or a support engineer or a ops engineer into a full-time DevOps engineer or a SRE engineer or a DevSecOps engineer, because that's where the more roles and responsibilities that you take, the more skills that you have, companies will be ready to pay you a higher salary and better positions equivalent to that. Okay. So this is when you compare to other positions, DevOps or SRE or DevSecOps, a fresher can get anywhere between 8 to 10 lakhs. Okay. The same time, when I say a senior DevOps engineer, anyone who's between 5 to 8 years can get an average of 30 to 35 lakhs as the median. And for someone who's about 10 years, you can easily expect anything on an average of 40 lakhs or 50 lakhs, depending on which position that you're applying. So this is the same way like what I was telling about the maid. So now, assume earlier you were having four maid, and for each one you were paying 1,000 rupees, which is like 4,000 rupees overall. Now you are going to hire only one maid, and how much are you going to pay them? Probably you're going to pay them around 1,800 or 2,000, right? But still, your overall cost is reduced, and that is where the salary for a single person is increased. So that is the same concept what you will be paid. So don't just think, oh, someone got this much of salary, I will just put my designation as DevOps or SRE or DevSecOps and I will get that salary. No, it is for the skills that you are carrying. So that's where, for each one of you, whether you like it or not, company doesn't want to continue with the same position just doing one task. So that's where all of you should start having the skill and plan in such a way that you either add these as a secondary skill and look for that position, or keep all the skills in your profile in a way that you can apply, whether it's called as DevOps or SRE or DevSecOps. All right. So that's how, for each one of you, you should be able to transition from your current position to this new technology, which is called as, again, doesn't matter whether they call it as DevOps, SRE, or DevSecOps. And when you are switching, first you need to know all the skill set, right? Whatever that I talked about, the 6 or 7 skills, and you should show that it is relevant to your current experience. So what do you mean by relevant? Now some people will just think, okay, I will learn something, or I will look into some YouTube or Google and I will try to take a project and I will do hands-on. But how is it related to the position? Because if someone wants to hire you, they will exactly ask you, have you already done something similar? Correct. It's the same way like a maid. So if a maid says, yeah, I know how to cook, but have you really cooked for some people? Where did you cook? Can you tell me in which house or which place that you worked? So that's the same question that they will be asking here also. Okay. So you're applying for a DevOps or a SRE or a DevSecOps. What did you do in your previous organization? Did you also do something using this skill set. So that's where whatever that your project's preparing, it should be not just highlighting your skill, but you should also highlight that you have already used it in various places. And that is where there could be around at least 1 to 2 years of relevant experience that you have to showcase, because that will add value. Only then your overall experience will be adding value. If not, what they will do, they will always try to give you a junior position. Okay, so that's where first understand what are these 6 or 7 skills that is needed. Try to learn the tools and techniques under it, and then try to take up the relevant experience by doing projects, and overall we will be able to take up the hands-on stuff on that, and then you kind of start showcasing that and apply. All right, so with this, now, I know everyone will have this question. Okay, you've been talking about so much of tools. How exactly do we do, right? And that's the primary purpose for us to do this DevOps Ninjas program, right? So we exactly train regardless of which background that you are from, whether it's a technical or a non-technical or even a fresher. So we will primarily focus on these skills. So whether it's called as DevOps or DevSecOps or SRE, right? We want you to make sure you understand what are the different tools and techniques available, and in that, what are the things which is more latest. Because you should not be spending time, and because I understand, like if you want to switch, you don't have like 1 year to switch. You want to switch into a better position in a matter of 3 months to 6 months. Now, with that in mind, how are you going to learn? So that's where focus should be on what is latest in the market, and focus should be on all the skills which is more important, which will help you to get the desired position or the salary that you want. So primarily what we do, we divide our training into, you can call it as 4 phases. Okay, so why do we do it in 4 phases is because, as I said, the role that you're going to apply in the market is divided, and according to that there will be different set of tools and techniques that you are going to learn. So first, we will try to focus on the DevOps side of the role, in which there are majority of the tools will be focused, like Git. You'll learn Terraform, Ansible, Docker, and then when you talk about Kubernetes, there are different levels of Kubernetes. There is CKAD, there is CKA, which is the administration, and related to that tools like Helm. And then for the pipelines, you have to learn tools like Jenkins, and we also have a modern CI/CD, which is the GitOps, for which there are tools like Argo CD, Argo Rollout, right? Now, once you are familiar, you can start applying to any company as a DevOps engineer, but you should not be ready, because if you go and join some company wherein they ask you some skills on the monitoring, and that's where is the SRE. So as an SRE engineer, what and all you need to know? So it's basically more about monitoring. So you should be knowing how to monitoring an application, you should know how to monitoring a machine or a database, or how do we manage logs, and not only that, how do you manage your network, right? So that's where in SRE, we will be focusing on some of the tools like Prometheus, Grafana, the ELK for log or Fluentd, and to take care of the networking things like HTO, Calico, or Jaguar. So that way, you will be able to have the skill wherein you can also apply with the combination of DevOps or SRE. And finally comes the third phase, in which we will start looking into the tools for the security, which is called as DevSecOps. So what is DevSecOps? Well, whatever the tools and automation that you do in DevOps and SRE, you should know how to secure. So that's where there are some additional tools that you should be familiar with, and some processes using which whatever that you do in DevOps and SRE, you are going to automate, right? So what is that? Like, okay, you run Terraform or Ansible or Docker or Kubernetes or even Jenkins. How are you going to secure all of them, right? So that's where there are various tools that we will have to go through and understand, like HashiCorp Vault, Checkao, or SonarQube, or your OWASP for your pipelines, as well as tools like Claire, Trivi, or specifically for Kubernetes, some of the tools that we will go through, right? So this way, whether it's an image or a Kubernetes or your pipeline or an infrastructure or cloud, you will know how do we apply the security. So this way, you have the skill sets which you need, whether it is going to be primarily for DevOps or SRE or DevSecOps. Well, we will not stop, because the fourth phase is where we will be getting into what we call it as job ready. Now, when we go through each of this phase and each of this tool, which is what we call it as module by module, you will have projects at the end of each tool or module. So that way, you will have projects which will help you to get familiarized in each tool. However, when we come to the fourth phase, we will also do a capstone project. It's not just one or two, we will do multiple, in which you will learn how all these tools are put together and how do you real time project is something what you can do. For example, okay, you go to a company, right, or a client. Now they are asking you to set up a continuous delivery or a production. Now for that, you need to know how to use Terraform to create a infra on the cloud like AWS, and how do you use Ansible to automate that machine, and how do you do the build using Jenkins, and then how do you deploy it using Kubernetes, and how do you automate the monitoring of it plus security. So that's how capstone projects will be additionally, which you will be adding up or summing up all these individual tools and do the project. And that's exactly what we call it as the job ready. So in which you are going to learn these projects, which you can directly showcase whether you want 2 years or 3 years or 4 years of relevant experience. Okay. And apart from that, once we complete all these, then we will be able to prepare each one of you individually, depending on what is your current position, what position that you want to apply for. So we recommend a mentor, and for that, how your resume should look like, or what your profile should look like, what should be your intro, what you should talk, what you should not talk, how are you going to show these projects that we have given you relevant to your current experience, so that it matters when you go out. You don't just say that, hey, I am a overall of 5 years, or I am overall of 10 years or 12 years. Well, out of my 10 or 12 years or 5 years of experience, recently, whether it's 1 year or 2 year, these are all the different tools and techniques that I've already used. So that way, we will be able to mentor and do the mock sessions and help you prepare, start applying. So that's exactly what we do on the fourth phase. All right. So with these four ways, what will happen? You will be able to successfully transition your position from being a current engineer to a successful DevOps or a SRE or a DevSecOps engineer, right? But for that, again, comes the question, right? I might be a fresher, or I might be from a non IT background. Even sometimes you might be an experienced, but you do not have the basic skill set of how organization works, or you will not be familiar with some of the terminologies which is needed for automation, right? And this is when what we do is, before we get started in any of these tools, we always focus on having a masterclass. So masterclass will be our first module before you start learning in DevOps Ninjas, in which what do? We ensure that without any experience or without having zero knowledge, you should be able to still first learn all the basic things, or what we call it as prerequisites. So that way, how does an application run, right? What do you mean by build? What do you mean by deployment? And not only that, do you know how a company runs a release? What kind of testing is due? How does the development happen? Now for that, what do you mean by some of the tools and concepts like Git or GitLab or GitHub, right? And do you need to know how to write a program? Definitely not, because as a DevOps or a SRE or a DevSecOps engineer, you don't need to know how to write a program, but you are going to automate the build and deployment of these programs. So what are some of the essentials? So what do you mean by essential, right? Okay, if I'm asking you to run a Java application, what is that you need to know? So those kind of fundamental things which is required for building and deployment, and the entire release process is what we call it as the masterclass. Okay, so typically what we do is the first 3 days of our ninjas program is what we put it as the masterclass, and here we cover all these prerequisites so that regardless of whichever background that you are from, you will be able to successfully understand the different concepts that we have which is needed for you, and then kickstart your journey in actually learning the tools from the phase one. Okay, because you can consider for us this is phase zero. So this is where I was giving you an example earlier, like, okay, you want to do a degree. Before even you go to the degree, first you have to start with grade 1, grade 2. But even before you go to grade 1 and 2, well, you need to know what is ABC. So what do? They put you in something called as nursery for 1 year or 2 years, where you learn these fundamentals, like how to sit in a school, what are the things you have to expect, and learn some basic numbers and basic alphabets. And that's what you will start learning it on your actual class or grade. So that's the exact way what we would do, wherein before we kickstart our master program, we always ensure that we have master class, which is completely free and open for everyone, because we want you to first understand what and all is expected. And most of the time what will happen, there's a big question, people will come back, hey, I've learned all the tools like Terraform, Docker, Kubernetes, but I don't know how to use that in the interview, or what is project. Well, that is where project is not different from this, because it's not about using the tool. Like I was telling you earlier, okay, let's say you are using Kubernetes. If the question comes, do you know how many deployments do you do in a day? How big is your cluster? How many clusters that you're taking care, how many machines that you're going to have, or let's say you're using pipeline, right? How many pipelines that you've built, or you say Docker, how many images have you built, what is the content of the image? So we'll not be able to justify. So that's when, before we actually even start learning the tools, the masterclass completely focuses on ensuring you have all the prerequisites which is needed from the application side, from the build, deployment, the release processes. And with that, when we start learning the tool and we learn the projects, it will be easy for you to showcase that. All right. And this is where I invite each and every one of us to take up the next upcoming masterclass, okay, which happens very frequently. So, in case if you have not enrolled or missed any of our recent classes, please do subscribe and enroll. So, this way, you will have your journey kickstarted for learning, so that learn the prerequisites first and get the confidence and the idea on what you have to learn next. And then when you switch to the actual training and start doing the projects, you will be able to apply the real time projects relevant to your position. And that's the only way you will be able to get a 2x salary or a 3x salary. All right. So I'm going to see you next soon on the next masterclass. So please enroll it. Okay. So with this, what's the next thing, right? So again, for those who have already taken the masterclass, or sometimes if you have missed, so we have the next masterclass that's been planned from 16th. So that's going to be exactly on Thursday, Friday, and Saturday, right? So that is on this week. 3 days we are going to have the masterclass. So even if you have already taken, feel free to take once again in case if you have missed something. But if not, I would again highly recommend all of you to take up that 3 days free masterclass, so that you first understand where we are, and then we jump into the concepts of what is needed, how to learn, and then we focus on the projects with the help of that. All right. So with this, let me stop it for a while and put up any questions that you guys have.